All right, the Statue of Liberty. Not quite as complex a tale as the U.S. Capitol building. Obviously, a much bigger structure and a lot more people involved in the U.S. Capitol, and it has to be used more. It's a working building, in addition to being a major tourist destination. So that it obviously is a bit more complex. But the Statue of Liberty is interesting in its own right. And it has a bit of a story to it that not a lot of people are aware of. Maybe if you've been to the Statue of Liberty, you might be aware of it. But it's slightly unusual. So the basics: 305-foot tall statue on an island in New York Bay, and so this is designed to commemorate the friendship of the United States and France. Obviously, there's a ongoing give and take of partnership and culture going on since the U.S. went through the Revolutionary War. France was the backer of the U.S. in that conflict, and so that relationship has been had its ups and downs, but ongoing since the Revolutionary War. And this is going to be dedicated in 1886, just 1 year if you remember, after the completion of the Washington Monument. So a lot of tall structures going on in the United States at this time. So the statue itself is neoclassical and is an icon of freedom the world over. The world knows the statue, and for a lot of the immigrants who were coming in through New York, which is where the vast majority came through at that time in history, there at the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, this was what they saw in the bay. As they came in on their ships, they would have seen the Statue of Liberty there, sort of a beacon of hope in the world. And so that in itself gave it a lot of significance, and maybe is the reason that it's quite so famous as it is today, is because that right there at its very start, what it got the eyes of so many people and would have been a significant part of their journey as new people in the United States. So the figure is Libertas, the Roman liberty goddess, and the tablet in her hand has the inscription with the Declaration of Independence, and the motion, she's holding the flame of liberty above, and the motion, she's stepping forward, and there's a broken chain behind her, so stepping away from, stepping away from bondage. And its origin actually comes from the post-Civil War era, when the United States finally got away from having slavery within its borders. And so there was this president, Laboulaye, who was the president of the French Abolition Society. And Laboulaye actually wrote about the United States at that time, getting past the Civil War, had thrown off slavery finally, well after a good bit of Europe had. And so he reached a point where he wrote that the U.S. had finally reached its promise of freedom. So it, at its inception, said that, all men are created equal and blah, 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 but that hadn't applied to everyone. But now it did, and at least in theory, and it's going to take a while for that to work itself out. But in theory, the United States now, all men are created equal, and so his words actually inspired a sculptor by the name of I want to pronounce it Bartholdi. I've never actually heard it said, so forgive me if that's a poor pronunciation, but this guy was a sculptor and a designer, and so he wants to commemorate this design as well. Now, this is where it takes, or commemorate this event as well. And so this is where the design of the statue takes a bit of an unusual turn and goes through Egypt. So the designer Bartholdi is committed to designing a large statue for the entry of the Suez Canal. It was supposed to be a lighthouse for that important thoroughfare there. It was, the idea was this was going to be an Egyptian peasant in robes carrying a torch high above. So just a sort of a national art piece, basically. And it was going to serve as a lighthouse. There were many sketches and models made, and they were getting to the point where they were going to build it, but it was going to be an expensive project, obviously, and then a European conflict got in the way, and so things got delayed, and so with all of that happening, they just got to the point where the project just got canceled, and so it never actually happened. But if you stand back a little bit and squint, you kind of see the origins of this our Statue of Liberty here in Egypt with this lighthouse for the Suez Canal. So that's kind of a fun little trivia fact there. Where else could have the Statue of Liberty ended up? It could have actually ended up in Egypt. So that's one of those fun artifacts of history. But with this cancellation, the artist heads to the United States. He brings letters of introduction from Laboulaye, who saying this person is legitimate, that you can give to important people that that person wants to meet abroad, and he is going to travel the United States trying to make this project get underway. And so he meets with President Grant, who assures him that finding a site for the statue and making it a permanent thing would not be a problem. And he ended up crossing the United States twice by railroad, using the Intercontinental Railroad, just wanting to experience the United States and get a feel for it so that could influence the final design for this sort of monumental project. And so it gets underway. It's a slow process, no doubt about it, but it is getting kicked off. So by 1875, France is going to be in fairly good shape post-war, and there's going to be a good bit of interest generated by the fact that the United States had reached its centennial in 1876. And so people are excited that that's coming up, and they want to honor that event. And so a lot of iterations are happening. They're designing what the statue is going to look like, how it's going to be structured. One original idea was that Liberty would be holding a broken chain rather than just it being behind them and behind the statue as a more subtle type of thing. And the thought was, well, after the Civil War, holding a chain might be a little too visceral of a reminder, and so that they made some revisions trying to figure out what was going to be in the left hand of Liberty. They had the idea for the torch, but in the left hand, what is going to be there? And so they end up going with that, the tablet style to commemorate 1776. And so they announced the project in France called Liberty Enlightening the World. And France is... The idea is France is going to fund the statue itself, and then the United States is going to provide the location and also provide the pedestal to get that construction in place so that when the statue gets there, they can actually just put it up rather than having to wait for the pedestal to be built. And so the French government actually authorized a lottery with prizes. I believe there were some prizes like small versions of the Statue of Liberty and a few other nice things. The idea was to raise funds for the project, and which they do quite well. So they raise money across France to make this happen. And so they make progress. The very first thing that they get done is the right arm. They torch and the hand, the forearm. And funnily enough, that gets sent to Philadelphia for that 100-year centennial that they're having there, that World's Fair that preceded the one in Chicago that we talked about. And so there's a lot of interest generated around this. I believe you could actually pay money here at the stand to go up in and sort of stand on the upcoming Statue of Liberty. So that would have been quite a thing to get to pay a little bit of money to walk up in here. And it is, hurt a little bit by events of the day. The panic that's going on, the financial panic, 1873 was still caused some struggles, but there's still enough interest there to make this happen. And so there's a lot of fundraising that's going to be going on in New York specifically. Joseph Pulitzer, who's a publisher of the New York World, announced a drive the goal was to raise $100,000 to make this happen, committing to print the name of every contributor. So no matter how much you contributed to the cause, your name would get printed in the newspaper, which was fun for people to get to see their name in the newspaper. And so a lot of kids get involved. It's very grassroots. So a lot of the donations are very, very small, donations, because a lot of people don't have a lot of money at the time. But it's exciting enough to get them to add a penny here or there if they can, and get published in the newspaper. And so they raise a lot of money that way. And so Joseph Pulitzer has a strong part in the Statue of Liberty getting built. And so back in France, things are continuing. And funnily enough, the idea was that they were going to get this completely figured out and constructed in France, and then take it all apart and put it on boats and send it to the U.S. I guess the idea was, let's make sure it works and that it's going to stay up and be, because we want this to be a long-term thing. And so right there in the middle of Paris, the Statue of Liberty gets built. Most people don't realize that, but you can see the construction happening here. Sorry. One of the people involved, and you can see a little bit of it right here and going up this way where the arm is going to be, that is going to be the work of Alexandre Gustave Eiffel of future Eiffel Tower fame. He was an engineer and a designer of structure for France, and he is brought on after the original structural designer. I believe he passed, so Eiffel is brought in. He liked the original way that it was done, but he changed it to give it more longevity in the structure, and is going to be just has a strong hand in how the statue stays up long term. And so it's nice to know that the Statue of Liberty and the Eiffel Tower have similar DNA. The Eiffel Tower is going to be built just a few years later, and it's by the same person. So let me pause there because we're going to run out of time, and we'll be right back to wrap up Statue of Liberty.